We're getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK.
Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, lovely people. Welcome to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. So what does the war in the Middle East mean to us? What does it mean for us? My first guest this evening will be evolutionary biologist Dr. Brett Weinstein, who has suggested that the world faces a powerful existential challenge. I'll be joined too by Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas, to discuss the implications of America possibly being drawn into that conflict in the Middle East. And last of all tonight, we will look at the career of legendary England footballer Sir Bobby Charlton, who has passed away at the age of 86 earlier today. All of that, plus lots of conversation from my in-studio panellist and good friend, Tonia Buxton. But first of all, a roundup of the news from Lisa Hartle.
I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB Newsroom. The UK is calling on Israel to show military restraint with its war with Hamas. Addressing a peace summit in Egypt, the Foreign Secretary said he's spoken to the Israeli government about its duty to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives. James Cleverly also told the conference efforts need to be made to prevent an escalation in violence.
We have a duty to work together to prevent instability from engulfing the region and claiming yet more lives. We must work together to prevent the tragic situation in Gaza becoming a regional conflict, because that is exactly what Hamas wants.
Trucks carrying humanitarian aid have now reached southern Gaza. It's after the Rafah crossing on the border with Egypt was opened for the first time in 2 weeks. Israel imposed a blockade preventing the delivery of food, water and fuel after the Hamas terror attack. The group says today's delivery won't be enough to change the catastrophic medical conditions on the Strip. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres told the Peace Summit Palestinians need more help.
Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other. Those trucks need to move as quickly as possible in a massive, sustained and safe way from Egypt into Gaza. A 20-truck convoy of the Egyptian Red Crescent is moving today. And I want to express my deep gratitude to Egypt for the essential role Egypt is playing in this regard. But the people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed to continue to fight until all the hostages being held by Hamas are freed. It's after 2 American citizens, Judith Raanan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie, were released yesterday. Hamas says the decision was made on humanitarian grounds. It's believed more than 200 people are still being held by the terrorist group. In the UK, there's been a large pro-Palestinian rally. The Met Police estimates up to 100,000 people took part in a march through central London. They're calling for an end to the conflict in the Middle East and demanding the government stop supporting Israel's actions. Palestine Solidarity Campaign Director Ben Jamal says enough is enough.
We want the violence to end, so we're calling for an immediate ceasefire so that necessary humanitarian aid can be safely delivered to the people of Gaza. We are here today to assert the truth that violence will ultimately not end until you address the root causes of violence, and that is Israel's decades-long imposition of a system of military occupation and apartheid upon the people of Palestine. And we are marching to Downing Street to deliver a message to our political leadership that you need to end your complicit support for this system of oppression.
In other news, tributes are being paid to Sir Bobby Charlton, who has died at the age of 86. He was a key member of England's World Cup winning team in 1966 and a club legend at Manchester United. His family said he passed peacefully in the early hours of this morning. In a statement, United described Sir Bobby as one of the greatest and most beloved players in the history of the club. Sir Geoff Hurst, now the last of the 1966 team, said he'll be sorely missed by all of the country. The Environment Agency is warning floods are likely to continue near major rivers in England until Tuesday. Storm Babette is dumping heavy rain in parts of the East Midlands and South Yorkshire. London North Eastern Railway is advising people not to travel today because of severe disruption across the country. Derby City Council says it's experiencing the highest recorded water levels of the River Derwent as roads were flooded across the city. Recycling in England will be standardised from 2026. The plan will see homes, businesses and schools recycling the same materials. There will also be a once-a-week minimum food waste collection to reduce the amount going to landfill. It's all part of the government's drive to simplify the process. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Anyone fearful about the state and fate of the world tonight is welcome to stand beside me. Anyone devastated and dismayed by the seeming tailspin into hell can share that feeling with me. Anyone feeling helpless in the face of unfolding events, anyone feeling they're not enough, that they don't matter enough to make a difference, then come and be with me. Anyone wondering, doubting if humanity has learned much of real worth in the last 100 years, indeed ever, should know I feel the same way. For the past few years, we've been marched from bad to worse by people who are bad and getting worse every day. Anyone feeling sick at heart on account of how the so-called decision makers seem hell-bent on taking instead of giving? Anyone feeling enraged by how those characters seem determined to suck the very joy out of the lives of everyday people, if not to snuff out life itself, should know that I feel all of that as well. When it comes right down to it, all I really have to offer is the question a child might ask, which is, why? The decision makers already had their vast wealth, the power to indulge their every whim. They already owned most of everything and looked out on populations whose heads were mostly down, shoulders to the wheel, just making ends meet. And yet that was not enough to have them leave us be. Anyone who watched the daylight robbery of our rights and freedoms and who looked on helplessly at the deliberate sacrifice of physical and mental health on the altar of a supposed pandemic, who understands the totalitarian power over our lives being sought right now by the World Health Organization, who watched the easy segue into war in Ukraine with 500,000 dead Ukrainians and counting, and thousands upon thousands of dead Russians. Anyone who sees and fears the drive towards forever war, and yet knows because it's obvious that the United States of America is in no position to fight simultaneous wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, when that nation apparently cannot even defend its own southern border, can share those doubts with me. Anyone who thinks the rest of the West surely can't defend itself either, when all its might and money has been shipped to Ukraine or flushed down the toilet in pursuit of net zero. Anyone who writhes in disbelief at the realisation our leaders care only about boosting the profits of arms dealers and drugs dealers can come and sit with me. Anyone here in the UK who looks on at Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister and our Leader of the Opposition, and shudders at the thought and asks how in the name of all that's holy did we find ourselves asked to choose between two men who, by their every action, have failed the people of this country in every measurable way, join me by all means. Neither of those puppets and their ilk represents the people, you and me. They have no intention of representing the people. Instead, they obey on their knees the commandments of the corporate gods they worship. An MP worth knowing, Andrew Bridgen, fought tooth and nail for a debate on excess deaths, the undeniable truth that more people of all ages are dying every day when compared to previous years. 20 times he asked for that debate before it finally happened, and this week he stood in an all but empty chamber, the guilty parties staying away in droves, almost in their entirety, while one man asked questions about life and death that none of his colleagues cared to contemplate, far less answer. Who are these spineless, graceless non-entities? Why should we regard them, far less listen to a word from any of their mealy mouths, supposing their snouts were ever out of the trough long enough for any of them to listen, far less to speak, or is that squeal? And now, if you're wondering how much worse things can get, how much worse things have to get, and you're looking on tonight at the peoples of the old world, the inhabitants of the benighted Holy Land, and feeling only mounting horror and fear about the vortex of death spinning there, anyone feeling hopeless and sickened and grief-stricken in the face of all that can take a seat alongside me. Anyone who knows that the world is on the cusp of radical, irreversible change and fears the path we're being forced down, let me assure you, I fear it too. The poets have known the truth of it. Irishman W.B. Yeats, born into a country that has known more than its share of spilled blood, horror and grief, was especially clear-eyed. Things fall apart, he said, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? And then again, in The Stolen Child, he imagined a youngster snatched away from the world of the living. A world more full of weeping, he wrote, than he can understand. How true is that for all children, that the world's more full of weeping than we could ever understand? How can we endeavour to understand what's happening now? The endless sadness of lost children, dead children, and they're all our children in the end. What are we then? Who are we then? And by we, I mean our species that we call humankind. Depending on what you read and what you believe, we may have been here upon this earth for 200,000 years. Our fortunes have waxed and waned. There are apparently 8 billion of us alive all at once, right now, this moment. We're capable of anything and everything. Some human hands painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Others torture and murder their fellow human beings without a care in the world. A human mind came up with burn, baby, burn. Another wrote, thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joys and fears, to me the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. How is it that both those thoughts are side by side in the human soul? We're angels and demons both, as it turns out. I just look on tonight at more and more of those dreadful images made so hellishly familiar across the years of my lifetime, of pale, dry concrete buildings blasted and shattered into shards, shrouded in dust clouds and littered with the bodies of infants, splashed with blood, with old blood and new blood. Sometimes the likes of you and me can only look out at the world and share with one another the desperation of not knowing what to do, what's to be done, wondering if there's anything that can be done. Sometimes the most any one of us can do is keep going in hopes of better days. In 1848, an English magazine carried the following story. When an Eastern sage was desired by his sultan to inscribe on a ring the sentiment which, amidst the perpetual change of human affairs, was most descriptive of the real tendency, he engraved on it the words, "This too shall pass." Is that all there is for you and me tonight, the hope that this too shall pass? All I mean to do then is declare fellowship with those who are looking out at the world and feeling little more than helpless sadness. The English artist and writer Mervyn Peake was sent by a British newspaper to record the liberation of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945. Among much else, he watched a little girl die of tuberculosis there before his eyes, chalk-white arms and the pillows hardly creased by the tapping of her little cough-jerked head, her limbs like pipes, her head a china skull. Then where is mercy? What a question. Perhaps the only question worth asking tonight. Where is mercy? In the West, we used to tell ourselves that we lived by Christian values. By the way we've gone about being Christians in recent decades, centuries really, has been, I would say, a negation of the Christianity of Jesus Christ. Read the words of his Sermon on the Mount and ask yourself if it's Christ's Christianity that you see around you in the words you read and hear all around. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Instead of all that, we get one war after another and full-throated calls for yet more war after that. We're enthralled to a military-industrial complex, and war is its answer to every question in much the same way that if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything like a nail. After all these centuries since Jesus Christ, more than 2 millennia in fact, it seems the only God too many want to worship is a vengeful God. When Mahatma Gandhi, controversial figure though he was, died in 1948, philosopher Chaim Greenberg wrote about his passing and said that as well as a readiness for sacrifice, there should also be an urge to keep life holy, not to preserve sanctity shut away in a special tabernacle to be opened only at intervals and then sealed away once more, but to keep the source of sanctity always open and let it shine forth into the everyday, if only, if only. But that's not the way of humanity, not 2,000 years ago and not now. Vengeful gods are always in the business of an eye for an eye, but as Gandhi observed, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind in the end. Ain't that the truth? A world made blind by its own hand. Christians, Hindus, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, the whole damned lot of us. How can we look each other in the eye when we've yet to look ourselves in the eye? So much death, supposedly in the name of God. You must look down on his creation and wonder why he bothered. Here's the thing. In the face of all of it, if there's to be hope, and there's always hope, then I say we must trust that all those of us struggling with all that we see have to keep the faith that there can be and shall be better days. We cannot and must not turn blind eyes and deaf ears to any wrong. We must maintain the courage to stand side by side against evil, any evil perpetrated by anyone. I do know there's more than me tonight waiting for the advent of the better angels of our nature. In the end, all I can really say to all those hoping for the best while watching the worst is, I hear you. That's just my thoughts. You're free to disagree. Keep tweeting and emailing all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well at GB News, and I'll try to get to comments later in the show if time allows. Join me tonight, the author, columnist, presenter and friend, Tonia Buxton. Tonia, how do you feel tonight?
You just spoke my words. I'm grief-stricken. I'm hopeless. I'm desperate. I don't know what to do, you know, and it's a fear that clutches your heart. Anyone with humanity, and in particular mothers, are feeling the pain of all mothers. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to behave. 1 minute I'm raging with anger from both sides, but mainly I'm raging with anger with the people that have the control of our lives. I have no trust in them.
I feel that, and there's been a few moments over the last few years when it's felt as if something fragile was coming together as some kind of united, coherent opposition. As soon as it started to form, it's just been rent asunder,
blown apart,
and it happens and it happens and it happens, and you think, is that the plan? Anytime enough of us look like we're coming together across divides, it all gets thrown away again.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Abraham Accords and things that were happening then, and I'm not a political expert, but I am a Cypriot, so I've lived in a war-torn country or a divided country. Been divided for 50 years, so I understand a lot of what it means. But every time there are some talks that look like they're going to take you a closer understanding of different cultures and of an understanding of living together, something like this happens. It's not an accident, is it? And that's the problem, is that I don't believe it's an accident, and I don't trust the people that are in charge of doing the jobs of looking after us and making peace. I don't believe they want to make peace. I believe that this world is... the people that are in charge benefit more if we live in turmoil.
I asked the question in my opening remarks. Why? You know, when I look back just a few years, I feel as if, things were better for some people, maybe for more people, and that just seems to have been deliberately undermined, so that people are, you and me and so many people that I talk to every day, just exist in this perpetual state of anxiety.
Yes.
Just waiting for the next shoe to drop till you see how much worse things can get.
I mean, this has been going on forever, but for me, I can trace it. I didn't get involved with Brexit. I'm not a political person. I couldn't care less. I really couldn't at the time. But COVID and lockdown made me have to wake up, made me have to get involved. And the hindsight is, what we saw very clearly during that time is that lockdowns will only going to do more harm. People are going to die more from lockdowns than they ever would from this virus, or that is killing, average age is 82 years old, 86, I think. So that's when we all realised that something was going on. And honestly, since then, so since March 2020, for me, I have had a clutching of my heart, of not understanding what's going on, not understanding why people are suffering. This war now, I didn't understand, I still don't understand what's going on in Ukraine, but this particular war is so brutal and so gruesome that the men in charge have to stop it from perpetuating itself.
We're continually, it feels that someone somewhere is continually finding more and more appalling ways to set us at each other's throats. You know, we're always being told increasingly vehemently that we have to pick sides, that the time for discussion is past, and pick a side, and the very act of asking questions and revealing doubt is to invite condemnation.
Absolutely, I've had so much condemnation. I cannot bear what Hamas did in Israel. I cannot stomach it. It was beyond cruel, and I'm reading reports that are pure evil, just pure evil. But I don't want the mothers of Gaza, the children of Gaza, to suffer either. I don't want them to be rained down in fear. But evil walks among us. Hamas, to me, are pure evil. They have to be gone. So I've said both these sentences. I'm going to get hate from all sides. You're not allowed to have any understanding of all sides. What I don't understand, and I've said this to you, is I don't understand why the Jewish people of Britain are worrying about their safety when something that's gone on in Israel that's been done by Hamas. That's wrong. The Jewish mothers, my neighbours, my friends, didn't send their children to school on Friday because they were fearful of attacks. How can that be right?
People living in fear everywhere just is my heart breaks for all of them. I have to go into a break now, after which I'll be talking to Brett Weinstein, and he's an evolutionary biologist, and he has a take on what all of this might suggest, what this might mean for humankind as a species.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. I can freely say that I've lost long since all faith in politics and politicians to lead us to better days. If I'm right and the politicians are a lost cause, who can help us find a way, the way? With that in mind, I look for ideas and opinions in other places from other people. My first guest, ready to contemplate the developing hellscape in the Middle East, is evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein. Brett joins me now, I hope. Are you there, Brett?
I'm here. It's very good to be with you, Neil.
Good evening, sir. Good to see you. Now, Brett, you've spent your career studying, among others, the human species. Is humankind at a crossroads, or indeed on the edge of a precipice right now?
Unquestionably, and I think there's something about the current crisis in the Middle East that makes it particularly hard to see. There's one layer of this crisis, that is absolutely perfectly clear. The perpetrators of the crime, Hamas, is simply guilty of a notorious violation, a deliberately barbaric attack against people who are absolutely innocent. But the clarity of that layer is obscuring a higher set of patterns that we must be paying attention to. And I will try to put it in context. You jump in and ask questions if they're necessary. There are two evolutionary reasons that people cooperate, and really this could be true for any creature. One of those reasons is because of shared genes. The other reason is because of reciprocity and the fact that one can profit by partnering with other individuals who bring something valuable to the table. Society can be based on either of these, but for almost the entirety of human history, lineage against lineage competition was the reason for people to group in the way that they did. That has given way to a different mode of collaboration very late in history, the cosmopolitan West. In the cosmopolitan West, although we've never achieved it perfectly, we aspire to put our genetic relatedness aside and collaborate with those who are ready to collaborate with us. And the world is caught in a tension between these two modes. The problem is that in good times, this mode of collaboration, cosmopolitan West and the reciprocity that it depends on, functions very well. It makes a safer, fairer, more enlightened world. It's one that anyone would desire if they could see the comparison. But the problem is that as times turn to be not so good, it collapses into the much more stable lineage against lineage displacement. And that's where we are. And unfortunately, the Middle East is a flashpoint where this tension is especially likely to kick over into the lineage versus lineage mode and to drag the rest of the world along with it, something from which I think we might not emerge.
If I can jump in there, Brett, it seems to me, and I'm sure it seems to you and others, that we are much too dangerous to each other now. You know, you're talking about times in the past, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, where the threat we posed to one another at the existential level was limited by hardware and the rest of it. But as things are right now, too many of us in the different groups have too much potential to create global catastrophe. We can't let that. We can't allow those forces to be unleashed against one another.
That's absolutely right. Human groups have driven each other extinct previously, but the way the Earth is currently configured, we are so interdependent, there are so many of us, the systems on which we depend are so complex, and the weaponry we have at our disposal is so ferocious that historical pattern of lineage versus lineage displacement will not only be a tragedy, but it threatens to drive our species to extinction.
Brett, I have guests in the studio with me. Tonia, you listen to that, yes. And it forces you to sort of pull back and look at the whole situation from a different perspective. You know, how do you feel hearing an evolutionary biologist suggest that we're in danger of wiping each other out?
But I feel that now anyway. I feel that's what's going on. But the question is how do we stop that from happening? Because that lineage, that kind of tribalism that we have, you're right, we've just resorted straight back to it. How do we stop ourselves from doing that? Because I think that those that are manipulating us from up above are doing this on purpose, because we're much more controllable when we're in these little groups of our own. So what I would like to know, the question is, how do we stop this from happening? What can we do?
Brett, from an evolutionary biologist's point of view, where do the answers lie?
Well, I think there are two patterns that we need to pay attention to. One is that there have been many experiments with this cosmopolitan reciprocity structure for society, including in the Middle East. There have been experiments with this in Turkey. There have been experiments in Iran, in Iraq. Israel certainly has one foot very solidly in the modern West, and I believe a majority of Israelis aspire to join the modern West fully. So these experiments have to be protected and fostered when they arise. And then the other thing to pay attention to is what causes that mode, that superior mode of civilization to break down is scarcity. And the reason that we have scarcity has to do with the way resources are hoarded by certain factions. So when you talk about people who may have an interest in us battling, the reason to do it is so that they do not lose power and they are capable of taking more of their share of resources. So in effect, they have absorbed the abundance that might cause the entire world to default into this better mode.
Are there lessons to be learned from the way things have unfolded over the last 3 years? For example, I would say that Israel, the people of Israel experienced some of the most draconian conditions during the COVID adventure, you compared to any other country in the world. Are there lessons about a direction of travel in the way in which populations are being used and even misused by their own governments?
I think there is a very powerful, if difficult to accept, lesson. We can see in what the Israeli government did to the Israeli population over COVID, and what we saw in many other parts of the world, that our leaders are not necessarily on our side, and that means that at the point that we are called to wave particular flags, we may be at cross purposes with ourselves. It is truly the case that for the population of the world, this superior, cosmopolitan, Western approach to collaborating with each other would provide a higher quality of life. It would make us all richer. And the question is, if those who have power over us have a contrary interest because they wish to take more than their share, then we are at some level going to have to confront them. But what we've seen following the events of October 7th in Israel is that the coalition, as you described in your monologue, coalition that was forming in the aftermath of COVID as the scales had fallen from our collective eyes has been fragmented, and it almost feels deliberate. That this particular issue was going to take a group of people who had learned to speak to each other, and it is going to make it impossible for them to recognize each other as fellows anymore, and that is a disaster.
Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist. I'm sorry, time is against me. I've run out of time with you, but thank you so much for a completely different take on the situation. Thanks for bringing that to us this evening, and I'll hope to have the opportunity to pick up this conversation with you again in the future. Thank you, Brett Weinstein.
Always a pleasure.
Greg, you listen to that. You're an American citizen, and how do you feel contemplating your nation being pulled into another dreadful conflagration?
This could be a disaster if you look at it specifically, because we're not ready, frankly. And, the role of government is to defend their citizens and to look after their currency, just to maintain the currency. It's not meant to run the economy or manage the economy or tell children they can't go to school or tell people they can't run their business or wear a mask or get a vaccine. That's not the role of government. But what's happened with the Justin Trudeaus and the Joe Bidens of the world, and guilty here as well in the UK, where we found ourselves going to believe it or not, a blue state in America to get away from the draconian lockdowns here. Now, that's a sad state of affairs. At least in America, we have the federalist system, so you could have free states and not so free states. So the point is, the government, both in Israel and in the US and Canada and the UK, they failed to stick to those two major things. Protect your citizens, meaning have a military that is a deterrent to evil, and maintain the currency. But instead, they wrecked the currency. Canada, US, UK, they wrecked the currency. Guess who suffers from that? Not me. It's people that work and that actually drive to work and have to earn a living. Real wages went down 24 months in a row. So they're paying for it. So wear your mask. Your kids are not learning. Don't go to work. And then even when it came back, they wrecked the country. So they're ruining the lives of the people. And yet they're not defending the borders. They're not looking. So that's why we have this situation. There's no deterrence.
Greg, we'll be picking this conversation up after this next break, but we have to get across another break. So join us in a couple of minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. I'm joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, the chair of Republicans Overseas, and also by author and commentator Tonia Buxton. We've been talking about the evolving situation in the Middle East, and we're going to continue that now. Greg, if I can put you on the spot, what advice would you give the White House if you were invited so to do? What would you tell them as they look on at that situation?
I would say stick with what you've done so far in terms of what you're saying. Leave off the I hate America, I hate Israel, because that's what Biden did in the second half of the speech. The Oval Office speech was necessary. It's a grave enough moment, and it deserves an Oval Office speech. He started with, we need to rearm, we need to look after our allies, we have to do the right thing, we have to defeat evil, all good. And he actually mentioned Iran, finally, which he had quite deliberately not mentioned in the first 2 weeks. But then he went into the America is bad, inherently racist, Israel is not proportionate in the way they defend themselves, all that stuff, all that kind of, why are you down on America? America is a greater force for good. It's the greatest force for good in terms of defending the world. So stick with being positive about America, and we're going to do the right thing, and then you have to act.
But can you still stand by that, Greg?
Yeah.
After all these decades, after all these wars, after all of these millions of civilians who have died in every other corner of the world because of American foreign policy,
right?
Is it realistic to continue to say that America is a force for good and peace in the world?
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm not saying it just because I'm a patriot, because if you look at...
How can it be?
Because look at if we want to pick the biggest one of all, World War II, where the arsenal of democracy came to the rescue of the world, of the good.
Except it was the Red Army that defeated Nazism in Europe.
Well, yeah, we could get into the detail.
But to get back to the specifics, I mean, historically, correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't it been the assumed role of US presidents down through the decades of trouble in the Middle East to seek to damp down the fire?
Right. And
rather than to encourage any kind of stoking of the flames. And Biden, once again, seems to be failing in that fundamental role of let's try and minimise the hurt here.
I think he's done some of that. He has said, let's, beware, don't go in, let's wait for the hostages. I mean, I think their first impulse was to dial it down. And Blinken came out of the gates on that Saturday morning, and then they took down the tweet because they demonstrate weakness. And I think here's what I'm getting at. Yes, it's not perfect. It's an imperfect vehicle, the U.S. military. But it is the greater force for good. Do they make mistakes? Of course. But I'll look at the 80s, right?
I
The greater force for good.
feel that America or Britain are at all greater forces for good.
Yeah.
I now truly believe in my heart, this is my opinion, that any war that they go into is about making money. I don't believe it has anything to do with peace, because you've just got to look at the people who are in power and who benefit. Those that benefited from Big Pharma, those that are benefiting from the arms deals, it's the people that are in power. It's a conflicted, it's sinister, and there's no way could you call it a force for good. Not in a million years. I'm so sorry.
Because the US
isn't America and the West committed to forever war? Isn't that the reality at the moment?
No,
because that's how they keep the balance sheets ticking over it.
Look what Mrs. Thatcher and Ronald Reagan did in the 80s. Defeated the Soviet Union without firing a shot. They fired some shots in El Salvador and Nicaragua. Yes, okay, there were some proxy wars going on, but really there was no, nuclear annihilation. This was, look, what Biden has done, and when presidents make these mistakes, and I think we can say that Israel has made this mistake more recently, is peace through strength. The best way to avoid war is to prepare for war. I'm not saying that Afghanistan was a good idea or Iraq was a good idea. I'm saying if you stay out of trouble but prepare for war, it's peace through strength, and that works. And when you don't do that, when you're too busy masking and taxing and creating scarcity, as Brett mentioned earlier, if you're too busy doing that instead of defending your country. We have 7 million illegals coming into the United States. That means the government has fallen down on its primary role, which is to defend the borders, defend your citizens. And the best way to do that is with demonstrable military strength. I'm not advocating using it unless provoked.
But how can you come back from people like Blair, who took us to war on a lie? How can we come back from that? I agree with you, but you've got to have your strengths, but not when you're using those strengths on lies to make money.
I wish I had the crystal ball all the time, but we didn't know.
I don't think there's any way out of the bigger mess until we actually do admit to ourselves as the West that we, the people, have been oblivious or misled and misguided by our apparent leaders. That it's been one war after another, and we were told it was about the defence of democracy or it was about this, that or the next thing, when in reality I think the balance sheet shows that these wars have been provoked and prosecuted to make money for the people who always make money out of war. And I think the days of declaring that America and the West are the force for good in the world, we've got to move on from that.
I still think maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying that there are people that profit from it. But thank God we have it, because if we didn't, we'd be speaking German or Russian, or there'd be more of the carnage.
No, I'm going to have to jump in because we have another break that's upon us. After which, and finally at the end of the show, we'll be getting to a look at the career of 1966 World Cup winning legend Sir Bobby Charlton. Stay with us.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live, where, as always, we have too little time to air the opinions and get to the meat of the matter. However, we're discussing the Middle East. Greg, if I can come back to you, don't we also have to face the fact that it's a profoundly different world now? You know, the Arab world it's not completely united, but it's more united in many ways than it has been in the past when confronted by the West. You've got, Turkey has 2 million fighting men, ready to do whatever they're called upon to do. We've got, 130,000 Hezbollah rockets, pointed to wherever they're pointed.
Yeah.
America cannot realistically face up to the threat that's out there now in the old traditional way.
Well, the best way is to have alliances and friends and allies. I mean, obviously, America can't do it all. And it might have been more capable of that a generation or two ago, but not anymore. So I think, I'm not saying that America should make the decisions and police the world and police the seaways, but I think that what we saw in the last 2 weeks or maybe the last 2 years is people are finally seeing what a world looks like without American deterrence.
Okay. What do you think then, Tonia, of that? Are we seeing the world without the American deterrence? And if so...
No, I don't think that's the reason that we're seeing this world. I just don't see...
Yeah.
I think that if Britain and America hadn't have stepped in and muddled water that they had no business being in, we wouldn't be in this situation. I completely agree with having enough military power to defend ourselves, but we will never have enough military power where we keep poking at other people's wasp nests.
Yeah, I would much rather do it through economic cooperation. The Abraham Accords, great example. We saw that during the Trump years. We were on the verge of a deal between the Saudis and the Israelis. That would have been fantastic.
That's why this timing is so sinister.
You know, still need to carry a big stick. And I think that, you know, hopefully there will be no, this thing won't grow beyond the conflict the way it is right now. There's a great risk that it will, and nobody wants that. But I still would argue that the deterrence, or the lack thereof in the last 2 years, is what gave the opportunity for these evil people to do what they did.
Ticking clock means I've got to wind it up there. That's all from me this week. Thanks to my guests tonight, my fabulous panellists, Tonia Buxton, Greg Swenson, as always. Last of all this evening, though, the legendary England footballer Sir Bobby Charlton has passed away at the age of 86, and I felt it only fitting to end the show with a tribute to an extraordinary man. That's all from me. See you next week.
The greatest moment in English football. Sir Bobby Charlton following captain Bobby Moore to collect the 1966 World Cup trophy from the Queen at Wembley. The defining moment in the career of one of England's greatest footballers.
I'm a football romantic. I love football, and there are millions like me, to which this place is the focal point of the whole world. You know, you speak to people like Pele, you know, and Beckenbauer, and the highlight of their careers was when they played at Wembley for the first time.
Born the son of a coal miner in Northumberland in 1937, Bobby said the only choices open to him were the mines, the navy, or football. Thankfully for the world, he pursued the latter. Charlton's death leaves Sir Geoff Hurst as the only surviving member of the team that won the World Cup. At just 20 years old, a young Bobby Charlton was one of the Busby babes involved in the 1958 Munich air crash. He survived, although 23 lives were lost, including those of 8 United team members. Up until his own death, he remained the last surviving member of that crash.
A fine centre, and Bobby Charlton slams the ball home.
Bobby Charlton was named in the England squad for 4 World Cups. At the time of his retirement from the England team in 1970, he was the nation's most capped player, having turned out 106 times at the highest level. With 249 goals, he was Manchester United's highest all-time goal scorer for more than 40 years. He was also England's highest goal scorer for 45 years. In a glittering career, Sir Bobby won 3 league championships, an FA Cup and a European Cup with Manchester United. He remained a director at the club for many years.
Bobby Charlton was the player who gave us that elite world-class quality which enables you to go and win tournaments. And don't forget the soccer school. David Beckham was brought to the attention by his participation and involvement in the Bobby Charlton Soccer School.
In 1994, Charlton became Sir Bobby when he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth, and he continued to act as an ambassador for British sport.
I'm a footballer and tried my best and hoped that my ability was good enough to get me some success, which I've been lucky enough to have done.
He helped to promote London's successful bid for the 2012 Olympics.
This is such a fun place, and people love London. People love London, and we get them here, and we'll give them such a fantastic time.
In his personal life, Bobby Charlton married his wife, Norma Ball, in 1961. They had 2 daughters, Suzanne and Andrea. In November 2020, it was revealed that Sir Bobby Charlton had been diagnosed with dementia, as did several of his 1966 teammates. He stepped back from public life and has rarely been seen in recent years. Sir Bobby Charlton will remain a name synonymous with the beautiful game.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to Sunday, for much of the UK it's going to be a dry day, especially for parts of Scotland, and all of us should see some sunshine. We are still dominated by this area of low pressure, so we will continue to see the risk of some showers, but we certainly will lose the heavy and persistent rain which we have seen over the last few days. The last of that will move up into parts of Orkney and Shetland overnight, so most of us seeing a drier picture. Still a risk of some showers across western
parts. Over towards the east, could just see a few mist and fog patches forming, and in the countryside, could see temperatures falling into mid-single figures. So we start Sunday off with potentially a few mist and fog patches, but they will quickly clear. And then for many, it is a much drier and brighter day. Still the risk of some showers across western parts. They may well just creep a little bit further east from time to time, but basically the further east you are, the greater chance of staying dry throughout the day. Temperatures in the north, very similar to what we've seen recently, 10 to 12 degrees, potentially up to about 15 degrees in the south. Heading into Monday, a dry start for most, potentially a frosty start actually for Scotland. As we go through the course of the day, outbreaks of rain will come close to parts of Northern Ireland, and then later on we'll then see a band of rain working in across southern parts of England. And that really sets us up for another unsettled spell as we go towards the middle of the week.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News. Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy?